On August 31, 2021, a year after President Joe Biden announced the withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan, the last American units left the country. Soon after, the Afghan government was overthrown by the Taliban insurgency. To this day, only one state, Russia, has recognized the Taliban as the country's legitimate authority. Yet the lack of recognition does not preclude engagement. Despite repeated accusations of human rights abuses and links to terrorist organizations, many states, including Russia, China, Turkey, and even the United States, have in recent years stepped up engagement with the Taliban. For some, these ties are limited to security and humanitarian issues. Others go further, investing in Afghanistan's mining sector and other key industries. This approach creates a dilemma. Cooperation may bring mutual benefit, but it also carries long-term risks tied to supporting a regime under international sanctions. Afghanistan is a country long scarred by history. Sitting at the crossroads of trade routes linking Central Asia with South Asia and China with the Middle East and Europe, it has repeatedly been a prize for outside powers seeking to control this strategic hub. In the gaps between foreign interventions, the country was torn apart by internal strife. Beyond its role as a transit corridor, Afghanistan is also rich in natural resources. Gold, copper, iron, hydrocarbons, and most notably rare earth elements. It holds vast deposits of lithium, vital for producing batteries for smartphones, laptops, electric vehicles, drones, power tools, robotics, and other technologies. A 2010 Pentagon report suggested Afghanistan could become the Saudi Arabia of lithium, with reserves valued at more than $1 trillion. Afghanistan's location and resource wealth make it highly attractive for foreign investors and could, in theory, be the foundation of national prosperity. Yet any engagement is overshadowed by its political reality. The Taliban, now in power, has been accused of widespread abuses, especially against women, along with supporting international terrorism and the drug trade. As a result, the country remains under UN Security Council sanctions first imposed in 1999. Today, no state apart from Russia formally recognizes the Taliban government. Even so, several global and regional players are actively seeking ways to circumvent the restrictions. The European Union, the United States, and most international organizations maintain only limited ties with Afghanistan's de facto authorities. Engagement is largely confined to counter-terrorism and anti-drug efforts, as well as humanitarian and social assistance. An example of this was US and Taliban forces effectively fighting on the same side against Islamic State Khorasan, a former Taliban ally that split over ideological and theological disputes. In July 2021, during battles between the Taliban and ISIS-K in Jowzjan and Sar-e-Pul provinces, the United States carried out a series of airstrikes on ISIS-K positions. These strikes aided the Taliban's advance, although the two sides did not formally coordinate their actions. The United States and its allies take the hardest line on non-recognition, conditioning any shift in it on the Taliban's human rights commitments. They fear that recognition without reforms would set a precedent for legitimizing other designated terrorist groups. But for a number of countries, economic interests and strategic competition often trump normative concerns. China has shown particular interest in Afghanistan's natural resources. According to Bloomberg, from the Taliban's takeover through the end of 2023, oil output by Chinese companies in Afghanistan rose by 300% to roughly 5,000 barrels per day, with potential to rise to about 19,000 barrels per day. Under a contract signed on January 5, 2023, Xinjiang Central Asia Petroleum and Gas Co. committed $150 million in the first year and $540 million over the following 3 years to develop 5 oil and gas fields in northern Afghanistan. The Taliban would receive only 15% of the profits, but given the circumstances, even that split is seen as acceptable. Since 2021, Chinese firms have also explored lithium extraction in Afghanistan. Representatives of several companies have conducted on-site inspections of prospective projects, and Gouqin Company has reportedly proposed investing around $10 billion to develop lithium deposits, build processing and battery manufacturing facilities, and upgrade infrastructure, including mountain roads and tunnels. In addition, some states argue that isolating Afghanistan too aggressively will worsen regional dynamics. They contend the international community should look for avenues of engagement with the Taliban to support stabilization and longer-term development. On April 13, 2023, Samarkand hosted a meeting of foreign ministers from Afghanistan's neighbors and Russia, with Taliban representatives invited. The agenda focused on regional cooperation and integrating Afghanistan into the regional economies of Central and South Asia. The participants view the Taliban as a potential partner for infrastructure and economic initiatives. The proposals include supplying of Russian and Turkmen gas to India via Afghanistan, as well as bringing the country into China's Belt and Road Initiative by extending the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. States most closely engaged with the Taliban take a softer line on its domestic policies and even entertain formal recognition. In 2023 and 2024, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan removed the movement from their list of banned organizations. On April 17, 2025, Russia's Supreme Court suspended the ban of the Taliban's activities in Russia, and on July 3, Russia became the first country to recognize the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Some regional players maintain distinctive, specific relationship with the Taliban. They seek engagement with Afghanistan while fearing reputational costs. Turkey and Qatar exemplify this approach. They both keep close ties with the Taliban and often act as intermediaries in its talks with other countries. In Turkey, however, the Taliban is still officially designated as a terrorist organization, and Ankara remains cautious since an overt political victory of the Taliban could embolden extremist groups inside Turkey and northern Syria. This could encourage the Kurdistan Workers' Party and its Syrian affiliate to step up their campaign against the Turkish central government. At the same time, Kurdish movements are ideological adversaries of the Taliban, which makes tacit understandings between Turkey and the Taliban possible, aimed at jointly countering the Kurdish groups. As the only Muslim-majority country in NATO, Turkey has to consider how its Western partners will react, especially the United States and the EU. The Turkish authorities therefore try to balance between maintaining relatively warm relations with Afghanistan's leadership and fulfilling their international counter-terrorism obligations. Since 2011, Qatar has been one of the few states to sustain direct dialogue with Taliban representatives by providing a venue in Doha for negotiations and diplomatic meetings. Qatar has mediated talks between the Taliban and Western countries, helping organize humanitarian missions. It was in Qatar in 2020 that the agreement between the United States and the Taliban was signed to launch a peace process in Afghanistan. Similarly, in January 2025, Qatari authorities played an important role in the exchange of intelligence personnel between Washington and Kabul. Beyond diplomacy, Qatar provides humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. Since 2021, it has organized an airlift that has delivered hundreds of tons of aid, including 22 tons of food and winter supplies. In April 2023, a Qatari aircraft delivered about 60 tons of humanitarian and food aid, as well as educational materials. Through these actions, Doha plays a unique role in diplomacy and strengthens its own international reputation. However, like other actors, it avoids overly close cooperation in the economic, military or political spheres in order to preserve its status as a neutral mediator and not jeopardize its ties with the West. Qatar has repeatedly expressed disappointment with the Afghan regime's radical steps, especially regarding women's rights and education, and has so far refrained from formally recognizing the Taliban government. Thus, Turkey and Qatar demonstrate an alternative, more flexible approach that represents a kind of synthesis of the previous two. The participation of Afghan representatives in international security forums, such as the conferences in Doha and Moscow, reflects efforts to work more closely with the Taliban to address humanitarian and economic problems, while maintaining pressure on them over human rights. Afghanistan's status under Taliban's rule in the international arena poses a question, and any attempt to answer it inevitably leads to a moral dilemma. Today, there are three main approaches: outright non-recognition, attempts at full-fledged cooperation, and a compromise approach that seeks a balance between the first two. Ultimately, the international community faces a dilemma: act on moral principles or follow political expediency. Each state, standing at the intersection of ethics and pragmatism, chooses its own path.